Hello and welcome back to our podcast. Today we will be covering France in the Arctic, and to do so we have an expert, we could say, on France in the Arctic, Dr. Florian Vidal. You're a senior researcher at UIT at the Center for Peace and Security. Thank you for coming here.
Thank you for welcoming me and have this discussion on France and trying to give for the audience what France aims and a bit maybe history about what France has been done until today in the Arctic.
How would you say that the French positioning on the Arctic is? What is it that constitutes the French Arctic policy?
Yeah, well, of course, we have a long history that connect France and the polar regions through the different scientific expeditions for since the 19th century and then through the 20th centuries. But today, in the recent decades, one of the main driver has been science. We have this scientific station in Ny-Ålesund in Svalbard that we manage with our German colleagues from the Alfred Wegener Institute. So we have this long history of French scientific activities in the polar region. So it include both the Arctic and the Antarctic. That has been the prime, I would say, interest for France. But then we expand our interest. One has been tend to be like a priority for a certain time. It's the impact of climate change in the region, the environmental transformation that we are seeing up north. The French government and the different actually president in place. They used to have these strong commitments to have this kind of leadership when it comes to climate change. Of course, I can remember that France organized this COP15 in Paris in 2015. So that was the major event that France welcomed at that time. And interestingly, during that time, during this 2 weeks of negotiation, there is some side events organized around the Arctic. So it was included in this approach. So we have this stronger science diplomacy and climate diplomacy that France tried to advance and argue with the Arctic states and try to work together on this topic, and of course at the European level. And the third priority that has been moving, of course, in the last decades, it's the military dimension. There is a growing French activities in the Arctic seas. The first is the commitment that the Arctic Ocean is an ocean free for navigation, and this is a kind of commitment that actually align with the French allies like the US and the other Arctic states. So this is the kind of strong commitments from France regarding its allies in the Arctic region.
And speaking of the allies and the other states, how would you say France positions itself compared to, for example, you've been researching Italy and Spain. How would France position itself towards those in the Arctic? And also related to alliance specific, would you say that France is showing its military interest in the Arctic through these bilateral or trilateral formats, or is it through the NATO umbrella?
One of the distinctions with our colleague in Spain and Italy, it's both Spain and Italy have built a strong and I would say consistent polar policy. For a very long time, tried to develop its own Arctic strategy, so disconnected from the Antarctic policy. While Spain and Italy built this polar policy connecting both Antarctica and the Arctic for a very long time. So you can see some consistencies from those two countries in Europe. And France tried to reframe in the last 4-5 years. We have thought about our Arctic strategy, which will include both the Arctic and the Antarctic. And now what is interesting when it comes to the Arctic properly in terms of strategy, it is clear that the military dimension that what kind of contribution France can bring to its allies in the region, the military, particularly the navy, is probably one of the main assets advantage that France that can bring. And of course, the deterioration of the geopolitical landscape in both in Europe and in the Arctic region makes France having a stronger role. And of course, it's interesting how France tried to frame its relations with its allies. And there is a growing bilateral relations that's flourishing between France and the Kingdom of Denmark, but as well between France and Finland and France and Norway. So they take this more bilaterally, but it's framed within the NATO context as well. So you have these different the bilateral layers. So you have this kind of bilateral formats for discussion where you have a lot of exchange between our different partners. But then you have, of course, in terms of to operationalize our contribution in the Arctic, NATO becomes, of course, the main framework for this cooperation. And for example, concrete example, France used to participate in many military exercises in the north of Norway, like with the cold response and a similar kind of military exercises. So and this kind of exercises, of course, under the frame of NATO and other allies that can be associated. And now in the context, we have Sweden and Finland part of NATO. It makes even more sense that NATO is a stakeholder that in which France can move in and develop from this framework more deeper connections with the Nordics, but as well as with the Canadians. So we have as well these strong bilateral connections.
You mentioned NATO and how France is increasingly communicating with Denmark and then would exert its influence and also in Greenland. How would you say that France positions itself by using this Greenland situation as a case, but also in general in Arctic geopolitics, in this especially like this tense landscape with relations with the US?
What is quite fascinating, I must say, it's how France has in a way succeeded to take the leadership when it comes to the Greenlandic issue and this strong, I would say, turbulent moment in the transatlantic relations. France has developed a very interesting diplomatic approach with the Kingdom of Denmark. Of course, we have this really strong connection now between Paris and Copenhagen, but in the same time is committed to support the integrity of the Kingdom of Denmark and is really active in Greenland. And in February, France officially opened its general consulate. And actually, it's the first European Union state to do this. So France, and during the crisis, when we have this deployment of European troops on Greenland in order to show commitments of the European partners vis-à-vis Denmark, the Kingdom of Denmark, France has been leading in a way this movement for actually France in the first episode of these tensions in January 2025 when Trump made a strong statement that he want to take over Greenland somehow. France tried to convince the Danish authority that we can help you. We can help you to show, give you reassurance about the integrity of your kingdom and to protect of any kind of external threats. And for a long time, Danish government tried to keep this matter as a bilateral issue between the Kingdom of Denmark and the US. But with this second round this year, I guess that the Danish authorities understood that maybe having this extra strength coming from the EU would be quite useful to create some leverage and balance of power with the US, which was needed, I guess. And now France, when it comes to Greenland, has of course not only this diplomatic and kind of even military commitments, because we deployed these small units, 15 military personnel had been deployed during these exercises that has been organized by the Danish. But it has as well some economic interest. France is, of course, like the European Union, very interesting to secure these critical minerals in Greenland. And interestingly, earlier this month, it was at the beginning of March, I think it was in Canada, actually, in Toronto. There is a kind of fair trade conference and meeting, and the French National Geological Survey signed a strategic agreement with the Greenlandic Department of Geology. So France is going to help and to the Greenlandic to develop and to understand, of course, the geological potential regarding the critical minerals. So you have these ongoing developments, and France as well try to help as well the scientific community. So we have different funding programs regarding Greenland. There is it's very interesting how this dynamic between France and Greenland is developing. It's quite interesting and a bit fascinating, because for France now we have some kind of way to increase our position in the Arctic and expand our role in our capacity. Because for now, our main role is based on our military capabilities, and since within the European Union we are the only nuclear power, it is very important. And if we combine with the French President Macron had made this very important statements and doctrine regarding the French nuclear policy, allowing the possibility to expand the nuclear protection, I would say, or shield to any European partner interesting to get this protection. When it comes for the Nordic countries, for example, it can become very strategic and interesting to have this potential strategic alliance with this nuclear umbrella. This is something as well for the Arctic interesting, due to the ongoing situation with the two Arctic nuclear power, namely Russia and the US. So that's as well something. One of, I guess, the main contribution, it's clearly the security driver.
With both Russia and the United States in their own separate wars in their spheres of interest, the Arctic is really facing a very uncertain future. And you mentioned this French possibility to contribute in terms of security as one of the primary drivers. My question to you is that how much room is it really for this contribution in the future? One thing is the nuclear umbrella, of course, but is it easy for France to just come in to the Nordic countries, for example, and say, hey, we will protect you? Or are there power struggles there?
I guess there is probably humbly really state that, of course, we just be there based on the willingness on our Arctic partners. Of course, we cannot pretend to do like, yeah, we are coming and hey, you have to welcome us and we are here to protect you from the US or from Russia. No, it won't happen that way. It's more about if Nordic countries or even Canada, they are open to get more help from France. Of course, at the French capacity. We don't. Of course, we are not. We are not a superpower. France should most modestly state that we are a middle power, like the other European powers, and maybe one of the driver as well, because for a long time, France has been advocating for this strategic autonomy. And in light of what's going on in our transatlantic relations, now this strategic autonomy is quite well received. It is very important that the French doesn't claim, "Hey, we were right all along." No, I think we need really to be humbly that we just show you a path. Well, we are seeing what we are seeing now, and maybe it should be worth to considering to maybe expand our autonomization in terms of defense and security. And of course, France is really eager, in fact, to integrate other partners. And one of the interesting developments in that matter when it comes to the Arctic security is the growing connections between the UK and France. And because it's not only about the Arctic, it's the connection between the Arctic and the North Atlantic area. And this is a matter of national security for both UK and France. So that's, in my perception, this kind of commitments, but not only France, it will be a combination of European states. And of course, we are seeing as well Germany being more willing to participate. And then we saw, for example, that Germany deployed some military vessels after the Russian invasion on Ukraine in 2022 to help to secure and monitoring critical infrastructure in the Northern Sea. And because you have all the oil and gas infrastructure that is from a critical importance for Norway, but for the European states.
So it's very, very important to maintain that form of cooperation. What would you say are the main tension points that France will need to take into account for future of Arctic geopolitics? Are there anything that, for example, is a threat or is a possible problem but is not addressed, or vice versa, something that is addressed but is not really as big of a problem as they would say it is?
I guess, of course, the geopolitical landscape in the Arctic, and I would say more broadly, is moving very fast. Is so quickly that is very. One of the main issues from French perspective is how to anticipate this shifting dynamics. And then, of course, the main concern, for France is how the Russian on the reinstall some sort of deterrence after this important loss from the conventional forces, particularly in the Kola Peninsula. So how the Russian army will address and try to rebalance, because this is now, from the Russian perspective, this is the main issue. Because since Finland and Sweden is part of NATO, then you have this unbalanced situation. And that will, of course, may create some tensions between the Nordics and Russia. And of course, one of the main issues that has been, there is a lot of discussion for over decades, actually, about this connection between the Baltic and the Barents Sea. And of course, the spillover effect, if there is some military tensions between one Baltic state and Russia. We know that there will be this there is a high probability for spillover effect. And then in that situation, France can anticipate to avoid this military escalation in the whole region. And then there is another layer, because we talk about geopolitics and it's more short or middle terms, but then we have our long-term issues when it comes to the Arctic. And it will be very interesting, because France, the main contribution looks with the military security dimension in the Arctic, but still the main contribution remains science. And one of the main concerning issues that connects science and security is the situation with the ice sheet melting in Greenland, which affects the AMOC, this famous ocean currents that give us Gulf Stream, and we have a rather reasonable climate and not that extreme like North America. And interestingly, you have this first Iceland that mentioned this is a security issue. And this is very concerning, because it's not only about the Arctic states, it's the whole Europe. And this is this kind of long-term issue that we should address at the European level, because then it needs anticipation and adaptation, because this is a kind of process is very uncertain, but we need to be prepared for such uncertainties. So that will of course have a strong long-term impact. But I think this is a kind of contribution in terms of thinking and planning for long term should be really considered, since France is kind of committed for this climate diplomacy. So maybe this is as well another role, and not only about military, that France can play into the future.
Climate catastrophe is a security question, no matter how much we want it or not. But okay, my last question to you then. Imagine that you are sitting in a very central position in the French government. You are responsible for not only everything Arctic, but you are responsible for everything polar. What you say, it will be done. What do you want to do? What are the policies you want to develop? What do you want to change? What are the recommendations? How they're implemented? It's very open. But you have all the power you want.
Oh, then if I have all the power, it's one of the main, because I'm in the position that I can I can tell a bit about this. It's probably we need more fundings, money. Well, our main struggle, and it's very difficult for France to, in the long run, to have a strong and reliable position in the polar region if we don't commit ourselves to invest, either for developing new scientific bases, for example, in Greenland, that can be an option, or increase research in different domains, or participated, but again, maybe not individually, but with our European partners to increase our capabilities for monitoring, like in outer space, for monitoring climate and for communication. There is many type of activities that we can develop, but clearly one of the thing, and it's maybe a process that is in development in France, but it need to be sustained and be reliable. It's to completely unified our research units, both from the Arctic and the Antarctic. I spent last year some time in Japan, and I can say that the way Japan has organized is a Polar Research Institute that actually have an overview, a complete overview of all researchers in all Japanese university is very fascinating. So of course there are some changes, but still the level of investment, that's the kind of level France should think, I guess, if we want to pretend to be a strong polar nation.
I really like it when you put a scientist into government and then the scientists say give more money to science. but it is true though. I mean, it's the core, it's our knowledge. No, but Florian, it's been fantastic, and especially considering that you are researching many things that are also not France in the Arctic. It's outer space, Russia, everything. It's been fantastic to have you here to talk about France.
But thank you for welcoming. It was a great pleasure as well.
Yeah, and thank you for listening.